Root collar excavations are our first TPA. We refer to it as a gateway because it's going to lead you into all kinds of other activities. Using the supersonic air tool is the only cost-efficient way to complete this double action treatment. Now, what do I mean? You've got the first 3 steps pictured in the protocol here as authenticate, locate, and excavate. And excavate is the root collar excavation that you must complete so that you can visually inspect the anchors of the tree, and then go forward to step 4, which is the evaluation stage. And we're going from asset protection to the new green shift, trying to get your customers to think in terms of how much cheaper it is to keep and treat than it is to remove and replace. That's sort of the basic premise of the Cheap to Keep Trees and Landscape protocol. However, if you currently don't own an air tool, do not be dismayed. Much of this Cheap to Keep Trees and Landscape protocol will still be useful to you. There are many actions that you're going to see as you review all of these DVDs that involve tools that you have probably owned for a very long time. When we first were exposed by a friend of mine years ago, when he challenged me, saying that with just a minimal amount of equipment, a climbing saddle, a couple of rolls of rope, a pruner pole, and a 200-gallon poly tank, he could make as much money net after tax in someone's yard than I could with all of my hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment. And as it turns out, he was right. It took me years to prove that, but here's what I mean. In the first TPA, our root collar excavation, we refer to the bad 3 tree and landscape risk. And even though you don't have an air tool, you may want to book some business using this protocol. Here's what I do. You'll see illustrated in the upcoming DVD on root collar excavations how I hand excavate around a tree. You can do the same thing and present evidence to the property owner that the covered and smothered collar of the tree is infected with decay, insects, and the tree likely is offering evidence that it is covered and smothered. Now, covered and smothered is usually accompanied by the other risks that produce noticeable effects of dieback, small and misshapen leaves. You've got a comparison to other trees that if this tree doesn't look as good as the others, there's got to be a reason why. We have talked about the root collar excavation being the gateway treatment to so many other tree preservation actions that you're going to be introducing to your customers. And we introduced you to this graphic. We said there were 3 major areas of improvement. Systems, which is the 10-step protocol. Here are your 10 steps. There's 10 steps right in the middle. You can see they're pictured here. And I'm going to give you a real, don't get confused by this now. We're going to explain this in some detail in an upcoming separate training session. We can't include it at this particular time because we've got 11 or 12 hours of basic tree preservation action that we need to get you grounded in before. But this is the graphic that you'll be using throughout this Cheap to Keep Tree and Landscapes protocol to keep you and your customers oriented as to where you are within the process. And if you understand, if your customers understand, then you're much likely to get a good, positive result from your initial interview, where you are going to be gathering data in your diagnostic process to prepare a proposal for action. And this is exactly how it works. When you introduce this a protocol to the customer, you're talking about cheap to keep trees. Why it's cheaper to keep than it is to remove and replace. Let's keep what you've got. Let's take care of it, and it will yield much better results than having to take it down and start all over again with the risks inherent with establishing new plants and other types of vegetation under these extreme weather conditions. And so we've got cheap to keep trees, we're protecting the basic asset here, and we've got the first three steps, which is authenticate, locate, and excavate. And excavate is where your root collar excavation comes into play. And when I talk about a dual action benefit that you get from the root collar excavation, what I mean is simply this. You're going to be able to provide enough information to evaluate and answer one of the two major questions that your customer is going to ask. Will this tree fall on me, and will it survive to thrive long term? And the only way you can answer that is to look and have a visual inspection of the anchors, and a root collar excavation is the way that you do that. In an ISA survey of customer desires, what they wanted from their trees, listed in order of importance were pest problems, health of individual trees, you've got maintenance, species ID, cost of replacement, and planting suggestions. You can do all of those without an air tool. Every single one of them. And in the first DVD, you're going to see us indicate that with a tree resource evaluation, which is part of an ANSI, a Part 5, you can read all about it in that 11 or 12 page manual. It's a very simple, easy to read specification guide that is put there by best management practices of committees of the ANSI Standards Committee. It's a accredited standards committee, and there's representatives of everyone in our industry that represent your best interest, with the last piece of the puzzle being a visual inspection of anchors that can only be determined with a root collar excavation. You can book and bill this for a later action that can be combined with aeration and decompaction. You can determine that with diagnostic tools that are very simple to obtain. Incorporation of excess mulch, trenching, draining. If you have air tools and you have the power plant to power them, you can rent it if you want to. What I'm saying to you is don't get hung up on not having it. Set up time and practice. Make sure that if you rent this equipment, you know exactly what you're doing. We want you to have customized equipment that you practice with and you know what to do. If you've got it in inventory, let me urge you to watch this first session completely. What we've learned is you need 200 feet of hose, 100 feet, and 250s. Full capability with 2 guns. Puts you in the business year-round no matter what the weather is. Now, we've talked about the root collar excavation giving the customer so much bang for their buck because it's a double action treatment. And what I mean by that is simply, once we get the anchors exposed, we can evaluate and answer structural questions about, will that tree fall on me? If the anchors are solid, then we can be reasonably assured that the tree is going to stand there and hold itself up. Now, the second benefit that you get, and this is where this graphic comes into play, is that you've got these 9 steps that you see pictured here, and as you can see, we can go from excavate right here on step 4, where we go from 3 to 4 and we're evaluating, we're creating and cooperating, we're talking to the customer, we're figuring out what it is that they want. Then we can go all the way to step 7, where we found, and this is something that you can leapfrog 7 or 8 years of experience that we've gained. We didn't know this when we started, but the root collar excavation is one of the single most important tree preservation actions you can perform, because it will stimulate the tree to perform its services better without having a restricted collar, without having covered and smothered roots. There's all kinds of science and all kinds of support through all of our ANSI standards, the A300 standards that are supported with best management practices, consensus agreement by all of the committees that represent our best interest, that the root collar needs to be exposed to air and light, and when you do, you stimulate the tree to perform its services better. One of my customers that we've been servicing now for about 8 years tells us that his trees really didn't start to perform until we did the root collar excavations, and it allowed them to breathe. And after they began to breathe and get full capabilities to take the substrates from the roots up into the canopy and vice versa from the canopy down into the roots to stimulate lateral root growth, there were all kinds of good results that were that impacted the tree. They got greener, they got bigger, they got fuller, they got nicer. It was easier for the customer to see that we performed the first 4 steps: authenticate, locate, excavate, evaluate. Will that tree fall on me? And then we can leapfrog forward to stimulate, where we're able to stimulate, animate, and accelerate by a simple application of the first tree preservation action, which is your root collar excavation. Since you're going to be seeing this graphic at the beginning of each of our sessions, we've got 6 tree preservation actions. We're going to introduce them with a little talk like what I'm giving right now, and we're going to illustrate where we are in the process by pointing out on this graphic where we are. And so let me explain just 2 or 3 more aspects of this graphic that you can use to help your customers understand better what's going on. And it's very simple. On the outside here you see the 4 building blocks. That's water, air, nutrients, and energy. That's what you're going to be exchanging some of your customers' money for what they want. And in order for you to decide how to conduct that exchange using the 6 tree preservation actions, you're going to discover the 5th element. The 5th element is the combination of the creating and cooperating right here. Create, cooperate. That's you and your customer together, the 5th element, determining how to apply the previous 4. As the human pervasive influence that is exercised in virtually every ecosystem on Earth, you have control over how that is done. And so this new green shift is now in effect where you are using the basic building blocks of life. The same things that we as humans use are the same things that the other living things in the ecosystem use, and we're trying to give your customers a sense of how they are interacting and how they respond actively on an ongoing basis with the living things in their designed ecosystem. And so as we progress into the treatment stage, you can see where we've got the designed ecosystem and the battle for balance. Nature always strives for balance. It's called dynamic equilibrium. You don't have to worry about that term, but nature will balance itself if you give nature the chance to do it. And these tree preservation actions that you are applying to stimulate, animate, and accelerate the process forward toward their vision of success is exactly what you're going to be doing. And in the end, we're looking at new, green, and growing home values. We've lost so much in terms of the value of our homes. The way we're going to build this in the future is by making our homes cheaper to operate, more efficient, less costly, less risk, and getting more returns of what the customers want from their designed ecosystem in terms of the ecosystem services. We're going to get into this more and more as we go through our tree preservation actions: shade, erosion control, soil formation, privacy, clean air, just dozens of them that we'll elaborate on as we go forward. But know that this process here is what you will use to illustrate to them exactly what they're getting when they begin to exchange these big 4 using the 5th element in a new green shift to apply the tree preservation actions in the battle for balance in their designed ecosystem to get new green and growing home values. That's it in a nutshell. Use it and your customers will understand the benefits you're creating for them in their designed ecosystem.